Okay, welcome. A warm welcome to our audience from literally all over the world. Good morning in Tokyo, good afternoon here in California, where I'm based, good evening in DC, and probably what should be good night from the UK and Europe, which is where Kristi's joining from. So thank you. I'm Kenji Kushida, Senior Fellow in Carnegie's Asia program, and I lead the Innovative Japan, Global Japan research efforts, and I lead something called the Japan Silicon Valley Innovation Initiative. So joining me today, I have the great pleasure of having join us is Dr. Kristi Govella, Associate Professor of Japanese Politics and International Relations at the University of Oxford. Prior to that, she was the inaugural director of the Center of Indo-Pacific Affairs at the University of Hawaii, and she's also been a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Also is Mr. Yoichi Mineo, senior advisor at the Marubeni Institute in Tokyo. And before that, he was Marubeni's Washington chief representative, and he brings over 20 years of experience in cross-border M&A transactions in areas including natural resources and consumer sectors in the Americas. And then we have Dr. Yves Tiberghien, professor of political science and director emeritus of the Institute of Asian Research at the University of British Columbia. And he's also the Konwakai Chair in Japanese Research and director of the Center for Japanese Research at UBC. So we have people joining from all time zones, very international, broad expertise from literally around the world, multiple angles and experiences to bring upon the topic of today, which is how to expand U.S. Japan technology ties in the new global landscape. So audience members, thank you so much for joining us today. What is going to happen from here is I'm going to offer a few introductory remarks, then each of the panelists will give us some thoughts about what we should be thinking about, and then their thoughts, and then a bit of discussion among the panel, and then we'll go into Q&A. We'll curate some audience questions from you, the audience. So please flood us with a lot of good questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. And as is typically the case with these webinars, the views presented by panelists and myself are our own. They don't represent institutional positions. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is an independent, truly global think tank, and it does not take institutional positions on policy issues. So I have a few framing comments, and then we'll jump into our panelists. So, well, first, with the Ishiba-Trump summit being more successful than many observers expected, we have at the basic building block of the U.S.-Japan relationship that Japan's security relationship with the U.S. seems solid for now. And that fundamentally underlies Japan's economic strategy. So this is good news. Therefore, now is a good time to focus on economic relations. And for now, Japanese commitments to invest in the U.S. seem to be enough for the Trump administration. For now, direct investments in areas such as auto plants, co-developing LNG facilities in Alaska, building a pipeline, buying large amounts of LNG, etc. So this opens the way to focus on technology linkages. And so some specific technology linkages that are mentioned in the joint press conference, I mean, they included AI, quantum computing, semiconductors, and of course, a couple of weeks ago in the meeting with President Trump, Son Masayoshi of SoftBank's $400 billion commitment for 4 years with $100 billion in the next year for data centers and AI-related infrastructure. This took a lot of headlines. But there are a wide variety of technology linkages that are currently, in my view, understated and underrated that are definitely worth highlighting. So my own contention is now is really the time to highlight some new narratives for Japanese relations with the US that go beyond the simple buyout or purchase type of investments. So webinars in the past and Carnegie's Innovative Japan, Global Japan series, we've examined some of the deep ties that are win-win for both sides. So let me just rush through about 8 different mechanisms and patterns of things that we should be aware that are happening and that can build the foundation of this. Often webinars like this will start with the big picture and then broad issues and narrow down. We're going to do the opposite. I'm just going to throw a bunch of trees and then we'll go out into the forest and look at the woods. So First is Japanese companies as global platforms to rapidly scale US and Silicon Valley startups to take them global. So for example, Global Logic is a digital engineering services company that was bought by Hitachi a few years ago for $9.6 billion. And the Global Logic's revenue estimated revenue was about 500 million to about 2 billion. According to sources that weren't Hitachi. So we'll see with there's some uncertainty there just because I'm on the outside. But basically, having been bought, revenues increased a lot. They were able to scale up using partly Hitachi's various operations around the world, because Hitachi is an industrial conglomerate that does all sorts of things, and including Japan. And this company did not have exposure or presence in Japan, and Hitachi took them there. So Japanese companies as global platforms. Second, Japan's Silicon Valley ties. Almost all industries are represented in Silicon Valley, Japanese firms. There are trading companies, finance, insurance, autos, transportation, shipping, precision equipment, consumer electronics, media, and then a new wave of Japanese entrepreneurs and startups that are going global or even starting in Silicon Valley, including AI companies and others. And some methods that big companies use in Silicon Valley include innovation offices, venture capital investing, their own corporate venture capital, ties with universities, and direct investing. So third, Japanese corporate spinouts into the US and Silicon Valley. A great example of this, NEC Labs spun out a company called Dot Data, led by a Japanese engineer CEO who was an NEC researcher. And they offer AI products as B2B, business to business offerings. So spinouts where there's a lot of expertise, but they spin it out here, not in Japan. Fourth, co-developing and deploying new technologies. So there's a company near Tesla, a factory over here in the Bay Area called DMAG, and it's an early spin-out by Tesla battery and cooling management expert. And they've been partnering with various Japanese construction and agricultural equipment companies like Komatsu and Kubota and Hitachi Construction Equipment to make electrified equipment using modular batteries and highly efficient cooling that enables very, very fast charging. So this is a case where there's this core technology, and by co-developing it with Japanese companies, this company can scale. Fifth, Japanese companies as good global customers, because the sheer global size of a lot of Japanese companies, we can think of it as like a web of Japanese multinational companies that can procure from US or Silicon Valley companies. So for example, Tokyo Marine Holdings, the insurance company, partnered with a Silicon Valley company to digitalize customer feedback operations, but they deployed it in Southeast Asia, not in Japan, but from Silicon Valley. And Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group, MUFG, they brought a Silicon Valley company's offering to Japan that radically accelerated a document digitization process that was slated to take several years, and they compressed that. So good global customers. Sixth, contributors to US infrastructure. The Japanese presence is already here, for example, and then they're even more critical. So Hitachi Rail acquired a digital rail monitoring business to help monitor railway and subway, and then they're developing that. And Kawasaki Heavy Industries, they built their 5,000th rail car in the US, largely in New York transit systems. And they've had interesting partnerships, such as a Seattle-based digital solution provider called Slalom Build, powered by NVIDIA. And it's one of NVIDIA's case studies, basically to use a lot of AI and machine learning and sensors to digitize and make more efficient track maintenance. And they've made it into a Kawasaki track maintenance platform. So they're contributors here. Seventh, energy, right? What used to be called climate tech. But actually, in the framing of the new administration, if technological advancements make business sense and they cut costs or increase resilience, we have opportunities. So for example, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, whose US headquarters is in Houston, they've covered entire ecosystems from the power plants to industrial machinery and areas like optimizing and monitoring. And so specific local vulnerabilities, like the Texas power grid being relatively vulnerable in very cold weather or very hot weather, it can lead to commercial opportunities for large-scale battery deployment and other backup systems. And optimizing the power grid is more important than ever. So instead of a normative bend towards, say, climate mitigation, if there's a business logic saying we're lowering costs, potentially cost effective, then these areas look like classic technological opportunities where if the investments in the technology can lead to a payoff, then it's worth making those investments because we can get customers. And then finally, and to me this is a very exciting area, automation and upskilling. So as we know, major demographic challenges within Japan with aging workforce, increasingly severe labor shortages, while the US is increasingly facing a labor shortage. There was just a report from California showing how aging the population is. But of course, US labor shortage is likely to accelerate with immigration restrictions. And so Japan can be part of the solution. For example, Kubota, which specializes in agricultural equipment, they invest in Silicon Valley agritech venture capital. And they've acquired a company, and more on the way, that help automate fruit harvesting. And so this is not just about bringing the technology to Japan where there's a labor shortage. They can also help out here where there's a market opportunity because there's a looming very large labor shortage. That's automation. Komatsu has the construction equipment company, has many years of experience upskilling workers by providing partially automated diggers and bulldozers where inexperienced people can do the work that previously required large numbers of years of experience. And so a subsidiary of Komatsu Sony and NTT Docomo in Japan, they're actually starting to sell remote operation terminals that have a lot of screens and a realistic cabin levers to remotely operate diggers and other heavy equipment. And so it's a fundamental transformation of from blue collar work into office, almost white collar work. And so Japan is in position to accelerate this. And so you'll be hearing more about this soon. So these are some of the trees up close, sorry for going so slowly, to animate the discussion. So now let's zoom out and look at the much broader and international perspectives. So since it's past 11 p.m. in Oxford, maybe we start with Kristi. You can give us your overview, and then we'll go to Mineo-san and then Yves. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Kenji, and thanks to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for organizing this event and inviting me to participate. To preface my remarks, I'll just say that I work on a number of issues that sit at the intersection of security and economics and of government policy and business. So I'm going to offer a few comments from that perspective to try to frame the discussion. And I really appreciate Kenji's opening remarks because I think he did a wonderful job illustrating the diversity of companies and activities and relationships that are out there. And so, let's think a little bit about the broad background and then how that translates to very different areas of business. So I have 3 points I wanted to make. First, I think that in the current environment for business, more than any specific policy, the impact of the Trump administration and current world events is basically a dramatic increase in uncertainty. There's direct uncertainty about whether your country or your business might be affected by specific tariffs, for example, and then indirect uncertainty in terms of the impacts that U.S. policies elsewhere in the world or policies by other countries will have for the general global business environment. So we know that, for example, from the U.S., more tariffs seem very likely. We might see reciprocal tariffs that have been discussed a lot. We might see more export controls and other kinds of restrictions as this kind of so-called small yard, high fence approach expands. So suddenly it could be that many things that companies and others have come to count on as relatively stable features of the environment are subject to potential change. And of course, that makes it more difficult to navigate potentially. We saw that recently with, the announcement of proposed tariffs on Mexico and all of the impacts that would have had on businesses that had relocated their supply chains there, under a certain kind of expectation. The second point I want to make is that in recent years, we've seen the U.S. and Japan and other countries pushed together by common concerns about economic security. And that's really driven investment and initiatives in areas like supply chain resilience or various kinds of critical and emerging technologies among like-minded countries. But this is likely to evolve now as we see the understanding of economic security changing from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. So under the Biden administration, you heard this repeated notion that it was possible to promote or strengthen industry in one's own country while simultaneously working together with like-minded partners like Japan, for example, to mutually bolster everyone's economic security. So this kind of individual approach was compatible with working together. And we heard a lot of terms like ally shoring or friend shoring, for example, and proposals for things like a Chip 4 alliance among U.S., Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, aimed at creating a more secure global semiconductor chain. But of course, there was always a tension between these strands of economic cooperation and then economic nationalism. These things were interwoven together. And we saw that during the Biden administration in the case of the proposed acquisition of U.S. Steel by Nippon Steel, for example. And we all expect that this economic nationalism streak is going to get stronger under the Trump administration. So as we move forward, I think we're still likely to hear these structural concerns about security, and those will continue to create some opportunities for U.S.-Japan economic cooperation, and I think tech cooperation specifically. But I think those opportunities may change as the new administration reinterprets what exactly it means by economic security, and as specific industries or technologies potentially become more politicized. And so, we'll see the same thing transform into a slightly different form. The third and final point I want to make is that, uncertainty and policy changes aside, businesses have agency in this process. They're going to adapt. They'll find new opportunities, even if old ones are no longer as attractive. And as with most policy changes, there will be companies who find a way to make things work for them. So, I think that what we know about Trump administration policy in this second administration, there are some things that may be seen as more favorable for business. In particular, people look at the potential for deregulation or the focus on innovation over regulation. Just to give one example, I think if we look at AI, we see the Trump administration clearly moving away from the Biden administration's emphasis on guidelines, on ethics and guardrails, and that they want to make it a freer environment. Now, personally, I think that, there are good things about having those kinds of shared standards and governance of emerging technologies, and that those can actually create opportunities for business. But I think that, this is one of those things where some companies will certainly see opportunities in this. So you mentioned the big deal that was announced by SoftBank, OpenAI, and Oracle for their joint venture called Stargate. And the details of that aren't clear right now, but it was very cleverly marketed as crucial to maintaining American AI leadership and creating hundreds of thousands of jobs in the US. So you can clearly see this, marketing to the economic nationalism streak of the US. And then, SoftBank and OpenAI have also announced that they're setting up a new joint venture in Japan, actually, to offer AI services to corporate customers. So, I think that it's likely we'll see this in other sectors where regulations are removed or changed, and some companies will find opportunities in that and they will adjust. As Kenji mentioned at the opening, there's a vast diversity of companies. So, they'll be looking for the openings in this and the opportunities to exploit the new openings that are created. So I think I'll leave it there. And I'm happy to talk about more specific opportunities for tech cooperation in various areas later.
Great. Thank you so much. Can we turn to Mineo-san?
Yes. First of all, again, thank you for inviting me to this and a very diversified panel, I should say. And let me start with my personal background. I live in Tokyo right now, but I used to live in the United States for 3 quite interesting periods. Late 1990s to the early 2000s, early 2010s, and most recently until just last year. My 2 terms in the United States, I was responsible for M&A. My time working on M&A at Marubeni, my employer, the focus was simply how to maximize an asset value in the United States without any significant trade tensions, national security concerns. U.S. Japan strategic alliance was not a prime consideration in our investment decision. My 3rd time, however, in Washington, until last year, 2017 to 2024 to be precise, I witnessed a significant shift in the U.S. Policy direction. During that time period, there were trade war and post-pandemic and industrial policy, those were quite new. And against that backdrop, I think the U.S. and Japan relationship entered in a new phase, deepening tie, particularly technology side, as this panel's name suggests. And I think from a Japanese perspective, deepening tie in technology side means substantial technological transformation. And I want to first discuss about the current state of the economy of Japan. The country has had decades-long deflation and disinflation. But now, what we are seeing is that labor market is tight, corporates performs well, and wages, finally, we are seeing the upward trajectory. And the corporate now needs to boost its productivity, and this is an opportune moment to invest in technology sectors. And I think they should be ready for adapting the new technologies. And digital adoption is no longer optional, rather essential. That has been widely agreed. The last year's announcement of U.S. investment in Japan may suggest U.S. large-scale technology company may also see the potential as well. And also geopolitical tension makes Japan more attractive for technology investment. And from Japan side, as Kristi mentioned already, and SoftBank and announcement of the investment huge amount in OpenAI, and I shouldn't skip the Rapidus, those digital push seems to be very serious. And also, it is important to mention Japanese government has implemented multifaceted initiatives for promoting this technological and digital development. And I think risks and challenges exist because I'm working for a Japanese company, which is a very traditional one. And we need to overcome and labor, or also reform labor system, and also corporate culture. And also we need more training skills. But I think the potential advantage are more substantial. And let me change the subject a little bit to economic side. Many people in Japan have discussed about the recent new U.S. Economic policy. And I would like to highlight 5 policies worth being noticed. 5, tariff, immigration, energy, shifting back from the climate change adaptations to fossil fuel, tax reduction, and deregulation. And of the 5 of those, I would say the tariffs should attract the most attention. And I think many people agree with me. Tariff is simply put, if I simply put, raise price and export price to the United States. And as also Kristi highlighted already, and attract the retaliation, likely in the form of another tariffs from other countries against the United States. And immigration policy has already been implemented actively or broadcasted, I have to say. If implemented as it has been proposed, should cause the labor shortage. So both tariffs and immigration policies as proposed should have an inflationary pressure, could cooling down consumer spending. As the U.S. economy has majority driven by consumer spending, strong consumer spending, and that may be not ideal for U.S. economy. And also, I think Kenji mentioned already, Japanese company heavily invested in the United States. So it is not ideal either for us. And energy policy, I think it's a mix. Fossil fuel focus will be opportunity for, let's say, LNG export, but challenges for EV or the related businesses. And lastly, on the bright side, and tax reduction for corporate sector, tax reduction and deregulation, which definitely could increase after-tax cash flow and improving on the corporate valuation. However, I am just a little cautious because in reality, tariffs and immigration should come first and early, fast and early. Deregulation tax cut takes a while for implementing and also seeing actual results. So that's my preparation, and also let me stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Lots to discuss. So on to Yves.
Thank you very much, Kenji, for having me here, and thank you, Kristi, Yoichi, for fascinating comments. So I'm going to step back a little bit as the political economist here, and also say a few more things on the summit that was very, very interesting, the Ishiba Trump summit in a bigger perspective. So clearly, as just mentioned by two speakers, we are in a time of real systemic change and disruption. I think we are seeing a U.S. government at the center of the global system that's willing to use a shock and awe approach, both toward the U.S. government, but also toward the global order. So there's great uncertainty. I agree with Kristi. And also, there's going to be an unleashing of space for new technologies, but it's a great mixture, typical disruption. There's clearly going to be an acceleration on the AI side. On green tech is more uncertain, but it may continue outside the US. Now, in this context, the Ishiba Trump summit was really striking because it's the most normal, most peaceful development of the last 3 weeks in the US. In that sense, it's so striking, right? It's different, surprisingly normal, very different from so many things that have happened over the last 3 weeks. We know it was not very long, 30 minutes, followed by an 80-minute working lunch. But it appears to have been a real win for Ishiba. There was all the talk on security, Japan being top security partners, all the guarantees being confirmed, lots of specifics, on North Korea, on Taiwan Strait, on South China Sea, East China Sea. There is support for the favorable trend in Japan defense spending, so no pressure there. 2+2 confirmed. For Japan's liking, there was no mention of support for the rules-based order or the WTO, which is probably something on the list Japan brought. But it did mention all the unilateral groups that Japan favors, like Quad and Japan, South Korea, US, Australia, triple group, and Philippines one. So all this is on the strong side. On the economic side, it is mentioned that Japan stopped foreign investors for 5 years running, at least in the readout from the Japanese side. Talk of LNG imports. And what's also interesting is there was no mention of foreign exchange, even though it's going to be an issue broadly for the Trump administration, but there's no mention of the situation in Japan. As a result of all that, there was actually a bump in public support for Ishiba by about 10% since Friday in the measurements we got. So it's a remarkable development, and it does open some space. So now when we get a little specific from the joint statement, we see that there is emphasis on defense technology, promoting defense equipment, technology cooperation, which is, again, first with the Trump 2.0 administration. There has been no such opening with Canada or with Europe so far. And there is talk of supply chains. There is a big section on space, cooperation on civil space and aeronautics, and the Crew 10 mission to the International Space Station. So there's a whole space there. And then there is the strong paragraph on AI and high tech to cooperate on developing critical technologies, leading edge semiconductors. So that's interesting. I don't know here what they mean on semiconductors, but I'm going to come back to it. And jointly promote growth in the Indo-Pacific region. So, of course, we mentioned SoftBank. The question, of course, it's not mentioned in the statement, which is interesting. And I know on the Japanese side, there's always concern whether for the Trump administration, this is counted as just a company, SoftBank, or whether it goes to the credit of Japan. For the record, SoftBank, unlike many Japanese companies, is not majority foreign owned. It's actually really majority Japanese owned, only 28% foreign owned. And Sun myself, she still has 29% of the shares. They have a lot of cash reserve. They had 33 billion readily available at the beginning of the year, but they can leverage that and borrow a lot more. So this is a big, big story. So now, what is unique from a political economy perspective about Japan's offering to this new Trump 2.0 outlook? I think Japan is unique in this economic security bundle that it can offer and the positioning, because it's an expert and it has been pushing the frontier on question of economic security, a separation of supply chains, between the China-centered part and the non-China part. So the development of safe networks, very, very strong, of course, on research. And in that sense, for any serious work on economic security, where the US wants to go +1 beyond the US, it will find Japan as the most complementary and the safest one. The section in the statement on critical minerals was also interesting, with the intention to work together on developing and deploying cutting-edge small modular reactor that's on nuclear, but also diversifying critical minerals supply chain. So there's intention to do that globally. Now back to semiconductors. What's quite unique, I hang out quite a lot in Taiwan these days, and I noticed that around TSMC and in Hsinchu, there is in general a lot of optimism about the Kumamoto plants that have been developed with TSMC, and they are seen as very successful and moving very fast, unlike, in a way, faster than the ones in Arizona or in Germany. And that's due to both the fact that there's a whole network of small companies and tech companies, and the presence of talents, of tech talents, all present in Japan and in Kyushu. Very good common understanding, maybe corporate culture, and then very efficient industrial policy. And so that bundle, what has happened in Kumamoto, seems to be a place with there's a lot of experience and expertise that the US is likely to be interested in. Now, another thing worth mentioning in the bigger region is that in Southeast Asia, so far is not been targeted by the Trump administration, but we know that it may come after April, after they finish all the reviews, because of the issue of connector countries that have taken a lot of the slack, becoming a connector between China and the US and China and Europe. Now, they have done good things for the global public good. They have prevented the collapse of the global trading system, but they are partly a conduit for content, for materials that do have Chinese content. And in Southeast Asia, the country that's most respected and that has done a lot of building network and expertise and talents is Japan. And so I don't think that the US will get it right on Southeast Asia without a lot of Japanese support. So all this to show that we are in this period of great uncertainty, great change, great disruption. I think Japan, among all the countries that are very worried about what's happening, that includes my own Canada, Europe, of course, Japan is among the least worried, because Japan has a lot of assets, and it has shown in this early meeting, right, so far, a lot of critical dimensions that are necessary for the US, even in this new version. Now, the next question, of course, is that Japan also cares and worries about the future of the rules-based order and having a global economic order with degree of rules. So the open question is whether Japan can go beyond, securing a bilateral relationship, but play a contributing role the way Abe did to a degree of maintaining the rules-based order. And an example of that just took place yesterday. There was the AI Paris Action Summit. Used to be called Safety Summit. Now it got changed. And Japan played an active role Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs Matsumoto was there and signed the declaration. But it's noteworthy that the US and the UK refused to sign the declaration. So there, Japan indicated that it's also working toward hopefully the idea of some minimal guardrails and minimal aspect of securing an AI that's safe for the world. All right, so I'll leave it here.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. As always, we learn so much whenever you give us your thoughts. So, and thank you for the questions. Please keep them coming. It's always good news when some of the great questions are basically what I'd want to ask panelists, which means I'm on the right track too. But first, one of the things I wanted to open up, and to no particular order, anybody who wants to answer first. Basic question is, delving a little further, what are some of the areas of economic and technology collaboration that are most promising? And what areas do we see as the most challenging? And let me start by framing it, a couple of extra frames. One is that Kristi mentioned uncertainty. And uncertainty leads to inefficiency, but the need for resilience. Well, resilience is redundant and inefficient, but there are a lot of business opportunities there, because you need to build systems that you otherwise wouldn't have had to build and do things you otherwise wouldn't have had to do in pursuit of efficiency. So there's already there. Second one is deregulation. Mineo-san mentioned one of the 5 policy areas in tariffs, and then deregulation. Kristi and I share an advisor in Berkeley PhD, Steve Vogel, and his famous framing of basically, for liberalization or an increase in the amount of competition, you often need deregulation, which is decreasing rules, and also new rules or re-regulation to make markets work, marketcraft. And so in which areas do we see a lot of deregulation of things that were preventing businesses from moving forward in different ways? And which areas is deregulation itself not enough, and we need re-regulation or new rules? For example, the CEO of Tesla has been talking about enabling automated driving in a nationwide basis. Right now, things like Waymo or the Tesla, basically Waymo driverless cars is possible because of state-level rules in California. Texas is allowing some of that, but most other states, it's a state-by-state basis. You need new national federal rules on automated driving to have that spread rapidly. So which areas need deregulation, and then which areas need new regulation? And of course, Mineo-san did mention this too. Japan currently has the highest FDI into the US already for indirect investment. So it's a position of strength, which is good. And then in our discussion of AI and semiconductors that Yves talked about too, I think it's useful. A lot of talk about AI is just sort of jumbled around between the LLM software models that produce, say, generative AI, the applications that sit on top of different types of AI, and then the data centers that deliver AI and the processing power needed to create new models. And so traditional sort of telecom stack in terms of vertical layers, that paradigm applied to AI might be quite useful for identifying opportunities and challenges. Where do you get the electricity from to have big data centers? How big do the data centers really need to be? There have been some developments that suggest that maybe it might not need as much as we had thought, but maybe you still do. Then who's making the models? And then who are using the models in specific specialized areas? And there are different Japanese potential around each of those. But anyway, I'd like to open it up. What are some of the sort of areas of collaboration, different definitions of collaboration are most promising and most challenging? You can just sort of jump in. Yeah.
I can start. So I think an interesting area of ongoing, but also potential future cooperation is space and space technology. And Eve mentioned a bit about the mention in the joint statement. But as many people who are on the call will be aware, I'm sure space technology is dual use because it has both civilian and military applications. So it's an area where the U.S. and Japan have been interested in both sides of that. And they've been interested in securing supply chains for this technology, promoting innovation. And also in recent years, we've seen increasing commercialization of the space industry, so more private companies becoming involved. Of course, in the US, there are a number of companies, including SpaceX famously. And in Japan, too, there are an increasing number of Japanese companies engaged in space, doing things like debris cleanup, small launch vehicles, various kinds of satellites, et cetera. So it's interesting because space was an area that the first Trump administration really pushed and did show some leadership, particularly with the new agenda focused on returning humans to the moon. And they really pushed for the creation of the Artemis Accords, motivated by competition with China, of course. But this was one of the areas where the Trump administration chose to try to build some structures instead of withdrawing from them, for example. So I think that, of course, you mentioned that the continuing cooperation on civil space and aeronautics was mentioned, including the upcoming ISS mission that includes U.S. and Japanese astronauts, and they do mention Artemis missions. It's interesting because, just to get on this topic of change and kind of how the opportunities might shift, the space industry is currently anticipating that the second Trump administration may make significant changes to focus on Mars due to Elon Musk's opinion that Mars is a much worthier target than the moon. And also the potential appointment of Jared Isaacman to lead NASA has led to a lot of speculation that NASA could go from a more traditional government-run agency to one that really is more focused on supporting a more active private sector. So, and he's also someone who has ties to SpaceX and has financed these private space missions. So the thought is that essentially, this could accelerate the commercialization of the space sector. So I think it's an interesting area because, whether we go to the moon or to Mars or whether it looks like, X or Y, it seems likely that there will be some focus on space and that there will be opportunities probably beyond SpaceX, but certainly there will be an ecosystem of change. So I think that there could be interesting opportunities there that are yet unexploited, particularly if the focus changes. Again, some companies will have to pivot, and others may find themselves suddenly of more interest, perhaps.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And there's a startup ecosystem angle there too, right? One of the big set of IPOs that have happened in Japan's startup ecosystem were Astroscale, space debris cleanup, another one like iSpace, lunar mission, things like that. So both space as an industry of incumbents shifting, but also the new startup ecosystems and linkages there. Yeah, other opportunities.
Can I?
Yes, please.
I would make it very brief and also tends to be broad. I think defense and collaboration with Japanese startups, more precisely Japanese newly developing ecosystem. I'm a little hesitant to talk about it because of the Kenji's expertise, but the Japanese startups would be a critical part of the Japanese new ecosystems. The collaboration of the two, defense and them, would be very interesting to see. And also, Kenji also mentioned it, but an aging population in Japan could be, I think, liabilities for us for a long time, but could be the potential. And maybe we could be a pilot case for the rest of the world, and technology will help. And that's kind of a transformation from liability to the assets. And challenging side, also this is also broad from Japanese perspective, how to create enough use cases to use AI or other technologies to give more tractions and more attractions to an expanding on the user basis. Those would be a challenge because we are very different cultural background and society and the labor system, and we are improving, but still we are very different. And then many systems and the technology have been built on a different basis. So those are could be potential challenges that we have to also watch. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you.
I can add a couple thoughts. So we are living through the twin industrial revolutions. both green technology and AI/digital. Those are transforming the world, and they will reset the economy in the 2030s. And on both, I think the Trump administration, of course, wants to get rid of all the Biden acts, cheap acts and IRA, etc. But they're going to have to rejig the incentive structure somehow, especially on the green tech side, because they will realize that given that it's an industrial revolution that will reshape energy in the future, they won't want to fall completely behind. And on those things, there's a lot of initiatives in Japan, on batteries, on new type of solar panels that can be almost stuck, like that can be flexible, and they may be an interest in finding new types of mixed economy incentive structures to scale all this. The way, and similarly, then when it comes to semiconductors, it's striking that Japan is more successful than the U.S. in bringing back some of the manufacturing, and they will be an interest in cooperating or scaling this. And then they mentioned critical minerals in the text, but here too, I mean, eventually the solutions for that will be mixed economy solution, and Japan has been ahead of the curve, working on this since 2010. And they have funded projects in Vietnam and elsewhere that were very interesting and creative. And so those are all areas where Japan can play a critical partner role, and its joint interest. And those are things that will scale up massively in the future. So.
Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks.
Mm.
Yeah. So much food for thought. And sort of agglomerating some of your comments and into a framing that I'm about to come out with a piece, but a lot of this sort of circles around what I would call the areas of potential good collaboration, what I would call the 3Ds: defense, demographics, and disaster prevention / mitigation. Right? So defense, it's obvious. Demographics includes regional economic growth, but also literally defense, where the budget can be budget increases can be methods such as contests and things like that can also pull the startup ecosystem and others. And then disaster mitigation and prevention, which we haven't talked about so much yet. I'm curious, and I would, my recommendation would be to focus on these 3Ds as concrete areas of collaboration. So I'm curious, what kind of concrete recommendations would you have to how to build upon the relationship and sort of push forward the technological collaboration opportunities to the next level? We've been circling around this, of course, and you've mentioned several things. And in that context, what are the roles of some other countries and areas, Canada, the UK, South Korea, PRC, Taiwan, that could also influence U.S. Japan technology and economic ties in shaping this? Such short, simple questions. I'm sorry, but some people who are better at this than me would say there's a magic wand question. If you had a magic wand to take U.S. Japan technology relations to the next level, and you swung the wand and it would happen, what is it that you would do concretely?
I mean, I'll take a stab at it from one angle. I think, it's a crucial question. It's basically the question that everyone is asking themselves. But I mean, for me, I think that the way I look at things is often that U.S. Japan economic or any other kind of cooperation is embedded in a larger structure. And there are very few technologies or issues in which the U.S. and Japan alone can sort of solve all their problems or fully exploit opportunities. So I think this question, it kind of connects to your second half of your question about third countries. And I think if we look at it, it depends a lot on the technology and on the the supply chains and who's involved. But I would say that if we take something like the Quad, for example, on some of their initiatives on, like, say, undersea cable cooperation, or a lot of this is actually U.S. Japan, Australia, trying to ensure the security there and also exploit new business opportunities. A lot of their discussions they're also talking about AI for agriculture, about biotech, Open RAN deployment, which is essential. They think have been promoting it as an alternative to 5G, where they have security concerns primarily about China. But, to actually make Open RAN work and to actually make it, such that it can be adopted is really something that would require cooperation. And you have strong companies in Japan that work on that and in the US, but that would really require more to bring the cost down to really, make adoption happen, et cetera. So I think that, I think that in terms of concrete areas, I think in pretty much any technology we look at, there are really specific examples, but I do think that often there will be other third country partners who will be the most logical ones to bring in. And so in a way, I think the US has been working on this in like their so-called lattice work, trying to bring in allies and partners and do this flexible structure. And it always strikes me that Japan is really, among all of the countries, one of the most central countries to that lattice work. And so if Japan can play a leading role in brokering those connections and finding it, I think there could be a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I may tweak questions a little bit, but I think on this submarine cable and I think Google announcement of those investments, I think behind it, there should be a concept of US and Japan to expand their effects to the third country, mainly in Asia, and including the islands area and the Pacific area. So that is a potential because I think developed by US and Japan and promoting to the rest of those areas, that is from business perspective big opportunities. And I think that promote again in return and the further development in the technology and digital area. That's my thought.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
My thought is more, again, at the political economy level. So I think we know two things right now. We know first that what's happening in the early weeks of the administration in terms of trade and global economics has been essentially a message that institutions and agreements don't hold anymore, right? That there is no so we have an issue of incentives and creating a stable environment, a bit of certainty for investment and all this. So there is this issue. The other facts we know is that there has been at least a recognition at this moment so far that Japan is special and was a critical pillar for both security and technology and all this. And so that gives this opportunity, hopefully, for the creation of a special mechanisms between this administration and Japan that will, in a way, protect the relationship and incentivize. So there has to be some credible signaling or mechanisms to show that that certain commitments and investment promises or whatever agreement are made will last, will be for the long term, and then that will energize, that would motivate a lot, and then they can be and that what's special here is it spans across security and economy and business and technology, right? All the dimensions are together, and maybe there is a vehicle that can develop a set of incentives that's still compatible with the philosophy of the current administration. And then ultimately there will be a lot of win-win. But that means that as the US will want a lot of its wins, there's a lot of priorities it wants. Maybe Japan will be able to place some of its requests. And if they can develop this, it would actually also play a role reassuring the region, reassuring a lot of the rest of the world. But so there's a place for an experiment for what is appearing to be a really special relationship. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so much to think about. And of course, there's also the issue of delivering actual wins and then the promise of wins that can then open up different areas of opportunities. And there's this sort of country level institutions and agreements. How will they hold the commitments? Sometimes strategically, you might not really need the commitments to hold for something that's going to come online, a pipeline in the next 10 years or so. But promise of investments might be able to help the relations in other ways. I also realized as we were talking that probably some of reframing could happen among when we talk about, say, technology collaboration or cooperation. What what do we mean? And oftentimes these ties were pre-competitive research and other types of research-based ties. But I think in this administration and these times, we often might need to emphasize commercial deployment, webs of commercial deployment, or near commercial deployment focused development that can happen, and then moving various things from one place to another in terms of goods, services, the ability to deliver things, and then the ability to develop whatever you deliver. Do you have any questions for each other? When I'm listening to panels, it's always nice to hear what people want to ask each other.
I have a question for you, Kenji. Is that okay? So in terms of your defense pillar, what do you think is the most promising area? I'll just offer when I think about those things, I think there's some interesting opportunities that we see in like GCAP, the Global Combat Air Program between Japan, Italy, and the UK, and this kind of effort to build up defense industrial bases that could kind of spill over into other things. I think it's the same kind of conversation with Japan joining AUKUS Pillar 2 or something like this, which is far away. But what do you think is the most sticks out to you as the most promising opportunity there?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I would go along the areas, since you're much more an expert in the different kinds of international agreements and frameworks to talk about these things. Just from a straight technology perspective, I think the pillars of automation and upskilling. Which tasks can you automate? Which tasks can you take less skilled people and ramp up dramatically? These are very, very promising. So things that can be private, public, things that are military or defense spun out. So checking out infrastructure using drones, analyzing all sorts of things. Those are the kinds of areas that I would be looking at. But in addition to your expertise, space related things and all the spillovers that happen there. But yeah. Other questions anybody has for our panelists?
I have one for Yoichi.
Yes.
Is what do you hear from Marubeni and from Japanese companies in terms of what they would like to see happen? What expectations they have toward particularly toward the U.S. administration now, but probably what any feedback they get or.
Less tariff. This is the number one concern. And this is a little bit departure of technology, but immigration, our concern is more, rather than undocumented immigrants, rather than that, more legal documented immigration system. And we saw some challenges during the first Trump administration for Japanese visa, and also an ongoing disruption in the entire administration. We are a little concerned about shortage of resources at an administration. Those are very typical discussions we have done, and also I have heard, and inside and outside of my organization. So it's not positive, not negative. It's neutral, but just observing what is going on. The natural answer or reaction is that, and the disruption is good, but for the time being, maybe some price. That's what we think.
Yeah, thank you so much. In that line, I think it was very significant for the U.S. steel purchase, or the Nippon Steel's effort to buy the U.S. steel, that CFIUS, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, that evaluates purchase in terms of national security. They weren't the ones that rejected it, right? They said the president can, at the time, Biden can choose, and then Biden decided to block that. So CFIUS is not necessarily going to be a big blockage for Japanese purchases and acquisitions of US companies. Just maybe don't do a politically sensitive name, a historical company in a politically sensitive area that involves politically sensitive unions in a politically sensitive time. I mean, avoiding these kinds of things. I think there are more subtle and smaller scale purchases that can happen all over the place, and that would be a net plus in this case for both sides. So, well, with that, I think we have about only 1 more minute until it's midnight in the UK. Kristi might turn into a pumpkin. No, that's a Cinderella metaphor. Mineo-san maybe has to get on the train. Hopefully it's not so crowded anymore because it's 9 a.m. there to get to the office. Yves and I can continue our afternoon, and those of you in the East Coast can enjoy the rest of your evening. So thank you again so much, panelists, for joining this. This has been absolutely illuminating for audience members, myself, and hopefully each other. And thank you, audience members, for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.